All right, welcome to session 2 of a roadmap to emotional recovery. This session is about our coping behaviors. You know, we all have coping behaviors to deal with life. When we deal with traumatic experiences, our coping behaviors go to another level.
Yeah.
We're going to distinguish as we go through this lesson the difference between healthy coping behaviors and unhealthy coping behaviors. And so it's natural, HollyKem, when we experience a traumatic event for us to move into survival mode. Won't you talk about survival mode? What happens?
Yeah, when things happen, you know, we have this particular quality of life, right? And then this traumatic event happens, like the fires. And through that process, we're not at quality of life. We have to move into survival mode. You know, where am I going to live? Where am I going to shop? Where are my children going to go to school? These things. So now I'm at a heightened level of surviving. I'm at a heightened level of issues that are in front of me. Where before I might have been worried about, oh my God, I got to go to the grocery and make dinner. You know, I've got to hurry up and get the clothes done for tomorrow. That's quality of life and stress, right? However, now it's about where am I going to live? Where are my kids going to school? So I start to get into this survival mode of my needs being met on a very high level.
Yeah, and another dimension of our coping behaviors is developing behaviors to deal with our emotional pain.
Right.
Our last session was all about the emotional pain that results from traumatic events.
Right.
If I don't work with it, I don't manage it, I don't love it, I don't deal with it, then I'm going to develop coping behaviors to help me disconnect from it.
Exactly.
And those behaviors will initially help us, but eventually work against us. So, for example, I may enjoy a glass of wine or two to help me relax.
Right.
That's fine. But if I'm in a lot of pain and a lot of distress and I can't sleep and I'm drinking 2 bottles of wine every day, starting at 12 noon, then it's going to be a problem. So that coping behavior that was not a problem all of a sudden moves to a big problem because the more emotional pain I'm in, the stronger our coping behavior kicks in, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to think about, like, I'm a hard worker. You know, I've worked really hard for my family. I've done very well to provide. And now we've lost all this. So my coping behavior, I take that skill and now I'm working 18 hours a day. And I'm not resting, I'm not seeing my family, but I'm just driven by, you know, recouping the loss. But it's becoming, you know, it was a healthy thing in the beginning of my life, but now due to the trauma, it's become against me. It's working against me. It's taking away more losses.
Yeah, so when it starts to take a life of its own, then that's when it can become a problem. For example, I want you to reflect on when you're under a lot of stress or if you're in a lot of pain, what do you typically do to help you cope with that?
Right.
So let me give you an example how it can impact a relationship. Say if HollyKem's in a lot of pain, what she needs to do as her coping behavior is to talk it out and talk it out and talk it out, talk it out. And my coping behavior is I need to isolate and be alone.
Right.
Now, it doesn't create a really good dynamic because I want to be alone. I'm withdrawing. The more I withdraw, the more she wants to talk. The more she wants to talk, the more I withdraw. And those are ways that we deal with and cope with life. But because they oppose to each other, it starts to destroy the integrity of our relationship because they're the direct opposite. I'm like, will this woman ever shut up? And she's like, this man is living in his own world. He doesn't care about anything,
totally
anybody.
Zoned out.
He's zoned out, and so forth. It's all right if you have the coping behaviors. We all have them. But we have to evaluate whether they're working for us or whether they're working against us. And up to this point, you all have had ways that you've coped with stress, but it's going to be amplified significantly because you're in survival mode. So whatever that weakness is, I lose my temper. Well, I'm losing my temper a lot more. I isolate. I'm isolating a lot more. I like to drink a little bit. I might be drinking a lot more. And we want you to evaluate whether they're working for you or whether they're working against you?
Well, from last session to this session, remember I talked about the 1,000 pounds of pain. What I want you to know is that this part of me that's holding the 1,000 pounds of pain, that this part of me is completely equal, and it has 1,000 pounds of wanting to stop the pain. So they're equal. So every time I work with this, as you did in the last session, then I need to understand how this part of me wants to stop the pain.
Yeah, in our language, we talk about the part of us that carries our pain, we call it the wounded child.
Yeah, because we feel like a wounded child.
And the part of us that's our coping behavior, we call it our protector.
Right. The part of me that wants to keep me from having any more pain. So that part would say, I don't want to live in California anymore, where I've lived there my whole life. You know, it's like I want to get away because I don't want this to ever happen to me again. So this part will come up with a solution so this part doesn't feel this anymore or feel it ever again. Now, that may not be who I really am and what I really want, but in the moment of the pain, this becomes a reaction. And what we're saying is we want to give you a place to put those reactions. So you need to know if that reaction is from my true self, what I really want, what I need to do, or is it just a reaction from the pain due to all the large loss that I've experienced.
And let's revisit for a second to the grief process. When we're not actively working with the grief process, we can get stuck in the grief process.
Yes.
It's really important to work with this because, like, for example, we all know people who get stuck, may have experienced a big loss and get stuck in the anger stage. And they're not only angry about what happened then, but they're angry about everything, right? They're angry that the red light didn't turn green fast enough. They're angry about the traffic. They're angry. And it's like, that's an indication that I'm stuck in the anger stage.
Right.
What you need to realize, like with anger, that, and HollyKem will talk about guilt in a second, but what you need to know about anger is that anger is a secondary feeling.
Right. Say that again. That's important.
Yes, anger is a secondary feeling, which means that there's always a primary under the anger.
Right.
So, for example, if HollyKem says something that's degrading to me, which I know she'd never do that, but if she said something that was degrading to me, and I got angry with her, underneath the anger was what? Hurt that she said something to me. That's the primary, but the secondary is anger. If I'm driving down the freeway and someone pulls in front of me and almost get in an accident and I get angry, the secondary is anger, but under that was fear that I could have got hurt or somebody else in my car that got hurt. If you deal with the primary, you take away the energy from the secondary. Oftentimes, our coping behaviors are that secondary anger level.
Right. It draws off of that energy.
It draws off of that energy.
Right.
So we're talking about emotional management.
Right.
And so if I'm able to say to HollyKem, you know, when you said that, that was really hurtful to me, I'm able to communicate the primary, then I'm probably going to be heard a lot better, and I'm least likely to act out the anger or the second level.
Right.
So it's all important about emotional management and our coping behaviors. Why don't you talk about guilt?
Yeah. So guilt is when we're in the grief process and we feel guilty about what we've done or not done. Unfortunately, what happens when we have great losses like this is that we can get stuck in what we call survivor's guilt. And what that means is that I start to deny myself my emotional life of how I really feel about what I lost because I didn't lose as much as Elizabeth or I didn't lose as much as the Smiths. So what I start to say to myself, well, I lost my home. However, Elizabeth lost her home and her business. I lost my pet, but they lost 4 pets. So what I start to do is I start to tell myself that my loss is not that important because someone else lost more than me. And survivor's guilt can keep us from really going through the process of healing because I'm trying to downplay because I'm in survival. I'm going to say, well, it's not that bad, it's not that bad, it's not that bad. We can, as we work through the process, we will be very grateful that we have our lives. We'll be very grateful that I got to save this. We'll be very grateful that I have my animal. I'll be very grateful that I have my children. Whatever it is, we're going to be very grateful. But the truth is that whatever I lost deserves the right to feel.
Yeah.
So I don't get stuck in the part of me that starts to minimize and tell me what I lost is not important, so I don't feel the pain of what I did lose. So we just want to warn you about that. You're going to have that thought. It's going to come up. And what I want you to do is allow it to come up. However, I want you to also honor yourself that these things that you lost to you are very important.
We had worked with a family one time, HollyKem and I, and the family had a number of siblings, and the oldest sibling and the baby, the youngest, got in an accident and they both were killed. And the family basically, from that trauma, was blown apart. And it was interesting that each member went into their own type of coping behavior.
Right.
One got heavily into drugs, one got into more like workaholism and achievement, another one began to really isolate. The parents ended up getting divorced because of the trauma of that. And it was interesting as we evaluated their family, like each one had their own unique coping behaviors, and they got stuck in the coping behaviors, and it destroyed the family, and they lost their family.
Right.
Well, years and years later, we were hired to do a process with all the siblings. And in fact, the father, he didn't participate in it, but he paid for the whole process.
Yes.
What we did is that we said, tell us the story in front of each other of that day. And one of them felt really guilty because he thought he could have stopped them from going. Another one felt really alone because it was really close to one of the siblings. One of them was really angry because this happened and in the time that it happened and why it happened. And they had different experiences. They all were grieving, but from different angles. But the interesting thing was, as a family, we sat in a room and we had them each tell their story. And we had them each own their coping behavior and to communicate how they got stuck in those coping behaviors. And the reconciliation that occurred was unbelievable. It was so beautiful. And at the end, the statement that they all said was that we got our family back. We finally got our family back. It was such a beautiful thing. But I'm using that as a paradigm that you all experienced this tragedy, and you can't let it lead into another tragedy.
Exactly.
Of destroying the things that are most important to you. And so how do you do that? How do you not let it tear your family, your marriage apart? Is that you need to give voice with an honest voice about what's going on an emotional level, where you are in the grief process. Because as HollyKem was saying before, if you're carrying around 1,000 pounds of emotional grief, your coping behavior is going to be 1,000 pounds strong.
Right.
But if you manage your grief to go down to 300 pounds, your coping behavior is going to become 300 pounds strong, and you get who you really are, what we call our true self or authentic self, back. We want you to be like that family. That let this be a springboard to bring your marriage closer together. Let this bring a springboard, and this process will help you do that, to bring your family closer together, your friends closer together. Because it's like a fork in the road. It's either going to go off into the road of destruction and isolation, or it's going to be a springboard to bring you closer and more intimate together. And we wanted to really look at, okay, we need to take hold and find out what our coping behaviors and put a container on those behaviors.
Yeah. And the process that we'll be going into for the activation is giving this part of you a voice. And we'll be asking questions, just like we said before, is allowing this part to have a voice on how it has coped unhealthily and what does it really want to do, right? Because it's not going to always be very pretty about this part. This is the part that wants to, sue everybody And you may choose to do that, but I'm just saying it's going to want to sue. It's going to want to scream at people. It's going to want to
react.
Just totally react from the pain, which is we understand. We understand the pain of what you lost is so great that this part deserves to have a voice, but we don't want it to take you over where then you lose who you really are, and then there's more losses from that because it was not your fault that you lost what you lost. This happened to you. It was a situation, and it happened, and there's much loss, and you're going to want to cope. You'll start coping unhealthily in the beginning because you're in survival mode. You have to do what you have to do, but we can't get stuck there. Okay, so that's why we're doing the work, so we just don't get stuck in that survival mode of coping, and we can acknowledge that, see it, and then we can take our power back and become back to who we really are, no matter what was taken from us.
Yeah, when we get stuck in our coping behaviors, we get stuck to their coping rules.
Yes.
And I want to give you an example to illustrate that. Holly's stepfather was a Green Beret in Vietnam. And in order to survive as a Green Beret, he was often placed behind enemy lines with missions. So in order to survive and protect himself, he had to live by certain rules. Kill before you get killed. Sleep with one eye open. Don't trust anyone. Be hyper vigilant. Learn how to hide and be quiet. Now, all those things are necessary when he's in survival mode in the jungles of Vietnam behind enemy lines. Now, can you imagine if he stays stuck in those coping behaviors and he gets taken out of the jungle and brought back to Louisiana, to Thibodeau, and he goes back to his home and he stays stuck in his survival behaviors.
Exactly.
And he's still living by those rules. Kill before you get killed. Do not trust anyone. Sleep with one eye open. Always be hypervigilant. Like, that doesn't work real well when your wife wakes you up for coffee in the morning before you got your hand around her neck and you want to kill her, kind of thing.
Right.
And that's an extreme example, but that's the price of getting stuck in our coping behaviors.
Right.
So we want to bless you to say, look, we understand that you've experienced a trauma and that you've moved into your coping behaviors, but we can't stay there. And in order to do that, we got to really work session one, and we have to own and understand what are the coping behaviors that I'm susceptible to. And as HollyKem said, as we go into the activation, we're going to do an exercise to help you give it a voice and help you learn to contain it so it can work for you and not work against you.
Yes.
So we'll see you in the activation.